Hey, tourpreneurs, it's Mitch Bach, and just a quick note before we begin today's episode. Tourpreneur is currently sponsored by Google. We're thankful for their support of our community, and we are offering with them a completely free course helping you unlock the power and potential of Google's Things to Do program, which is specifically helping tour operators add their tours to Google in new ways that gives you new exposure and more direct bookings. To learn more, go to tourpreneur.com/Google. And as always, show notes, more resources, links to our newsletter, our business coaching community, and so much more are available on tourpreneur.com. Now to the episode.
The fundamental that you have to get down to is whose industry is this? Does this industry belong to the tour operators and everyone else works in service to the tour operators? Or does the industry belong to the OTAs and the ResTech and the tour operators are working in service with those? Now, you can come at that from multiple different angles, but my firm belief has always been, and I started as a tour operator, my firm belief has always been that this is a tour operator's industry who are best placed to serve the consumer. And ResTech is positioned to serve tour operators. So if those companies start taking VC and start taking all these massive funding rounds and other things, it does change that dynamic slightly, and not necessarily for the better.
Today we have Alex Bainbridge of Autora. Now, he's not here to talk about his own business, Autora. Alex is here to talk about the future of reservation technology, the technology that hopefully all of you, our listeners, are using. And if you aren't already using, this is one of your opportunities to listen into a podcast and learn a bit about reservation technology, which I deem as an essential, 100% essential piece of technology that every single operator should be using. So why have I got Alex Bainbridge here to talk about reservation technology? Well, Alex was one of the very first founders of reservation technology. He founded TourCMS way back in the day, 2003, 2004. We have a bit of history together. I was one of his first customers around about 2007. And in those days, there was really only a couple of choices. Alex's TourCMS, Stephen Joyce with ResGo, one or two others starting. And if we compare that with today, where we have over 250 different ResTechs, it was a very, very different world as an operator then. If you wanted to adopt reservation technology, you had a pretty limited choice on what to do. Alex actually sold and exited TourCMS around about 2015, 2016. I'm sure he'll tell us. So he's not in the reservation technology building business at the moment. He's in a different business. But he obviously keeps his eye on the future of reservation technology, and that's what we're here to talk about. So, Alex, the future of reservation technology. It's now a multi-million-pound business. You exited in 2015, 2016. Since then, we've had Booking buying Fair Harbor at some hundreds of millions of dollars. We've had lots of ResTech be VC funded. We've had Peak, probably valued at 400 million-ish, if it's raising over $100 million, maybe more, maybe slightly less. But this is big boys' toys now. This is big business. So are they all onto a winner, or are they all building something that hasn't got a role in the future?
Hello, Pete. Thank you for inviting me on to Tourpreneur. This is going to be an interesting discussion about ResTech. Yeah, are they onto a winner? Well, that is such a massive question. The fundamental that you have to get down to is whose industry is this? Does this industry belong to the tour operators and everyone else works in service to the tour operators? Or does the industry belong to the OTAs and the ResTech and the tour operators are working in service with those? Now, you can come at that from multiple different angles, but my firm belief has always been, and I started as a tour operator, my firm belief has always been that this is a tour operators industry who are best placed to serve the consumer, and ResTech is positioned to serve tour operators. So if those companies start taking VC and start taking all these massive funding rounds and other things, it does change that dynamic slightly, and not necessarily for the better.
Yeah, I think we obviously you're a tourpreneur audience here. I don't think you're going to get much arguments on who should be serving who on this. That obviously we all should be serving the customer. At the end of the day, none of us exist without the end guest who takes the tours and the activities and goes in the attractions. So we all serve the customer. But I don't think you're going to get much arguments from this audience that the technology stack that we all use should be built to serve the tour operator for sure. And on the whole, it's only my opinion, but on the whole, I think that's probably correct from reservation technology. Certainly my experience of the industry over the last couple of decades is most reservation technology are very, very operator focused, because they don't exist if they're not really.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned that talking about serving the customer. Well, it depends who the customer is, because most of us think we're in the tourism sector, and so most of us think that the customer that we're serving is tourism. However, and certainly the online travel agents are very focused on tourism. But when you start talking about ResTech, you can start looking at anything that's got a date and is bookable on that date. It doesn't necessarily have to be tourism. It could be leisure, or it could just be an asset with dates, prices, and availability that is communally booked, like a meeting room. So I think the concept of what a customer is quite different, or what the end customer is quite different where you are on the scale between being a tour operator, a ResTech, and an online travel agent.
Yeah, I think we have an awakening in the community that people are realizing that we're in the entertainment game rather than dedicating tourism. And we certainly have some members in some parts of the audience that will only deal with tourists. That is their only customer. But we have many other members of the community who deal with a wide range of customers, be that corporate companies, be it sports events, be it locals. We've just been through a pandemic where locals suddenly become the be all and end all, because they actually kept many businesses alive through the pandemic. So I think we've got a realization coming that we actually are in entertainment. Yeah. And the competition isn't necessarily the other tour operator down the road who's doing a similar thing. It's everything that's happening in your destination at any time, be that concerts for music, be that sporting events. It's basically anything that can attract a potential customer's interest is your competition, because we're all in the entertainment game. The customer is looking to spend their time in a way that's going to cost money, so they're looking to spend their time well, and therefore we're in the entertainment game.
Well, yeah, and I would just say, I mean, I'm not here to talk about my current business, but the biggest competition to buying a commercial product like a tour or an attraction entry is often something that's free. You can go for a walk in a market, or you can go sit on the beach for 3 hours. None of those experiences have to cost money. And in this kind of era that's coming up over the next few years, where due to the cost of living crisis that's happening in Europe and US and elsewhere, the pressure on price is going to be quite significant. So that's something that I found a little bit tricky, sort of having left sort of the tour sector directly in the last few years, is that the majority of customers take free experiences. That's it, free. Just they go to the market. That's a fun way to spend a couple of hours. And I think the focus all the time on these commercial products makes sort of introduces a bias that creates decisions that aren't always necessarily the right ones.
So getting on to ResTech then, and the concept of price, which is obviously exceedingly important, and everybody listening to this knows what we're going through at the moment. All input costs to all operators globally are going up. Therefore, all operators globally should be raising their prices, and if they're not, they have a major issue, whether they realize it or not. So pricing of experiences at the moment has to rise. Everybody should put their experiences prices up. So how can ResTech help their customers with pricing, because pricing is confusing for a lot of operators. They're very nervous about putting their prices up.
Yeah. I think you can put your price up if you put your service up. I don't think you can necessarily put your price up and keep the service the same. I think you almost have to target a slightly different customer base. One of the challenges that ResTech have got is that they've all shifted to this model where they charge a percentage of the booking as their the cost of using the ResTech.
Yep.
So, of course, as prices go up, the ResTechs are earning more for not necessarily providing additional features or services themselves. So this was always a problem with ResTech and working on a sort of a 5% model, which many do, which is it always disincentivized the companies that had to spend money to run products at slightly higher prices. So, for example, if you are a helicopter tour company or you're a food tour walking company, you have quite different capital costs. So one of you is going to sell a tour at $50 and one's going to sell a tour at $350. Why would you need to take 5%? What difference is there? Like if you got 5% on 50 and 5% on 350? So as prices go up, the ResTechs are going to earn more, which doesn't necessarily achieve the sort of the objective of putting your prices up.
Yeah, that model is incredibly popular now, and I understand why operators use it, because they're only paying when the transaction goes through. Personally, I've always found it barking mad, because if the market will wear 6% increased price at the transaction point, I would want my prices to be up 6%, and I would be paying for the ResTechs for a fixed fee on an annual basis, and then I would be more profitable. And that is just that is a fact from economics, and the tourpreneur is all about making operators more profitable. Therefore, if you can buy ResTech for X thousand dollars a year and you have the right turnover, and why would you not drop that 6% to your bottom line? That to me is just a standard economics way of doing it. So I've always had a problem with that. However, I totally understand, particularly new operators, people starting up, they don't want any fixed costs. Some destinations like North America are much more prone to accepting and added costs on at checkout, whereas Europe, places like France, try adding 6% on in France, doesn't work very well at all. UK has works sort of, but you do lose a lot of conversions by adding that 6% on.
Yeah, I think the market's going to accept it more now. I mean, when people started introducing that price concept, probably 10 years ago now, if you were a tour operator and you were using a ResTech and a competitor tour operator in your destination wasn't using a ResTech, because at that time, ResTech was new-ish, well, certainly web-based ResTech was new. Then of course you would have problems, because your prices would be uncompetitive versus your near competitor, which is all that really matters. Now, because there's much more sort of penetration of ResTech into the market, if everyone's got those same costs, it's much less of a concern in terms of your direct competitor having a cheaper way of doing things. So yeah.
So here's a question to you as an ex-CEO for ResTech. So if you have 3,000 customers, 4,000 customers, 5,000 customers, tour operators, you have access to more data than virtually every tour operator. There's one or two operators at the very scaled end who may have a little bit more data than you, but you have access to more data than any individual tour operator or any small group of tour operators. Therefore, you have more knowledge about what's happening in the marketplace than any tour operators. The OTAs may have a bit more knowledge than you just because of the width of sales. So you know what is happening with price in the market before tour operators do. You can see the trends. You can see the booking numbers. So my question is why is ResTech not aggregating that data and feeding back to their customers and telling them what is happening in the market?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the problem that ResTech's got is it's sandwiched between the online travel agents and the tour operators. So they can't act unilaterally. So it's not their data and it's not their ability to change the market. And that's the problem with having this 3-layer sandwich, is that you can't at any one of those layers act and change something substantially, because you have to bring the other two layers with you. So whose data is it? The thing about the ResTech is that they would probably, their perspective would be that that data belongs to their customers, which are the tour operators. And so therefore, even in aggregate, it's difficult to share. I remember with TourCMS, we used to have a daily booking count. So we were actually publishing how many bookings we were getting every day, and that kind of thing. And that was really interesting. Unfortunately, it's not published now, but it used to be published. But that was good. So there was some kind of aggregate stats that could be published to make it, make it interesting to people. But
it's
you're
not
right.
so much the booking numbers are obviously of interest, but the real, as we go into what I believe is going to be quite a challenging period going forward, the ability to price correctly at different times. And I'm not saying that's dynamic pricing. I'm just saying the ability to price correctly at different times is going to be so critical for operators to maintain profitability.
Yeah, I mean, that data exists. I mean, there's so many different ways of counting it, though. For example, do you say, okay, this is 4 hours long, $120, so therefore, what's the price per hour? And I know that you've done some analysis on that previously, a long time ago, at trying to compare the price per hour for all sorts of different kinds of experiences. And It's interesting, what does going to the cinema cost per hour versus what does going and sitting on a whitewater raft cost per hour? And just compare it on that basis. That would be interesting. I mean, but another way, but then that it's a little bit simplistic, because that tour or that attraction might be the one thing that you wanted to do that made you want to travel to that destination in the first place. So it's entirely what your memories are going to be about. And therefore, the value of that, not necessarily the price, but the value of that is so much higher. So if you said, oh, that's going to cost $200, and you go, well, that's going to be all my memories of this 7-day trip, suddenly it becomes good price. So you have to do the analysis on that would become quite interesting. But yeah, technically the data exists. I mean, one of the problems is that the data is pretty unstructured at most ResTech. So you've got sort of text descriptions, you might have a couple of images, and you've certainly got good dates, prices, and availability data. But you don't really have that much data about the itinerary. You don't know that this itinerary goes to a certain place and stays there for 10 minutes and goes to another place and stays there for 20 minutes. That data is kind of in free text within these long descriptions that people distribute. But that needs to become structured data if you're going to do analysis on it.
So moving on from there, I mentioned earlier in the intro, we have about a couple of hundred ResTechs now, everything from scale ones to small ones. And we have ResTechs who are dealing with 50 customers to 100 customers. We have a big bunch of well-known names who are dealing with 3,000 to 6,000, 7,000 customers. And then we have some market leaders, Ken Fairharbour's by far the market leader, dealing with north of 20,000 customers. Having said that, if you add all of them numbers up,
you're counting really tour operators. I think you should be looking at companies like Palaces as being a sector leader rather than necessarily Palaces, who now own TourCMS, rather than Fairharbour. Fairharbour might have more tour operators, but Palaces is well up there with transactions, for example.
Oh no, yeah, but there's different ways of measuring transactions versus. But for this audience on here, and mostly small, medium-sized tour operators, then what I'm getting to here is we have a bunch of ResTechs, well-known, well-established, some funded, some not funded. But when you add the numbers together, it isn't actually that big a number from operators using them. So that's good news for the ResTech, because that means, in theory, there's a huge market still to go. I would probably argue, and this is gut feel, no data behind it, that operators who are adapted or have already adopted ResTech are probably a wee bit more developed, a wee bit more leading. Then for the long tail that's left is probably a lot of small part-time jumping in and out type operators. So there may be a massive long tail left, but what is the value of that long tail? So where I'm going with this is we can't end up with hundreds of ResTechs all being successful. And at the moment, they're all trying to be, to me anyway, the same thing to all people. So they're all fighting over the same acquiring of tour operators, no matter what that tour operator does. They're also serving sometimes attractions,
Yep.
And sometimes not standard tour operators. So it looks to me, outside in, any customer is a good customer at that point at the moment. But if we just take the market, we have some people who are owned by the biggest travel companies in the world. We have others with massive VC money. The market has to shake out at some point, and some of these res techs are going to have to change the business model going forward. That's just a fact. They can't all survive on being all things to the whole sector.
Yeah, and there aren't that many knockout blows. By which I mean, if you're a res tech and you do a project and it takes 6 months, then 10 more res techs will do the same project. So there aren't that many knockout blows that a single res tech can take to move their position within the market on. But there is. Perhaps there is one which is a bit more long term. But as we're talking about the future of res tech, it's worth bringing it up here, which is fundamentally it will be whichever res tech gets AI first. That's it. So that between now over the next few years, the AI and all of the various different subcomponents of that will significantly change local tour operating and distribution. So whichever res tech gets that first probably has a chance to make a sort of a industry shift in terms of acquiring more tour operators from one res tech to another, or churning perhaps is the best word, but I don't really like the word churn, but that is the word that should be used.
Yeah, so by default then, as you and I know, AI's from a technical perspective and an engineering perspective is not particularly straightforward and simple. Therefore, those with the most resources from an engineering perspective, which means those with the most access to cash to build these engineering resources, are probably in a better position going forward to adopt that.
No, I'm not so sure. I think we're still in the innovation phase with AI. So if you have tens of thousands of tour operators, you've got a problem because you spend 6 months on a project. You've got to make it available to your 10,000 tour operators, and which means that as soon as you do that, your innovation is just completely ground to a halt because you are then having to support those 10,000 on something that's quite new. So I would argue that it's probably the smaller ones who are able to innovate because they've got their agility still. So I think there are inbuilt advantages for the smaller ones to innovate, but the smaller ones tended to have been late entrants into the industry. So, that they're not so well positioned because they've got less experience. They've just got, they're focused on sort of catching up their feature set to catch up with the leaders rather than necessarily coming up with a completely new feature set that's based around sort of AI, for example.
So if we just dig into transactions a bit deeper, my interest, and everybody in tour, not everyone, but the vast majority in tourpreneurs' interest is tours and activities. But we have this other big part of the sector in the industry called attractions. And attractions, as you know and I know, is volume. That is big transaction numbers on a daily basis, day in, day out, every day, whereas tours, activities are impacted in all sorts of things, seasonality and trends, all the rest of it. They go up and down, and it's a long, long tail, whereas we could probably spreadsheet the top 500 attractions in the world, and that gives an eye-watering volume of transaction on a daily basis, which makes the OTAs very interested in attractions, which makes ResTech interested in attractions. But from a builder of ResTech in your background, the question I've got here is, how do you build for these global giant attractions that do big volume versus building for tour operators in the long tail and attraction activity operators who are doing 250k a year versus millions a year? It seems to be very different customers that, to me, is building for.
I think it was a bit of a mistake trying to join these two sectors together. I don't think that there's any real similarity. but in terms of technology between what a small tour operator needs and what an attraction needs. And I think that it's just a sort of a marriage of convenience that the two sectors have been kind of joined together and have shared conferences, and are called the same thing when people refer to it in industry trade press. But I find that I don't find that there is a massive sort of feature set that is shared between those two different types of companies. I mean, even if you look at something like yield management, so how do you maximize for profitability? Well, an attraction might be able to dynamically price, for example. So when you hear people talk about dynamic pricing, it's nearly always attractions. Whereas when you're talking to tour operators, it's class-based yield management that should be applied. So you've got two completely different mindsets of how you do yield management. You can't even build one technology platform that kind of does both. I mean, you can, but I think you end up with too much sort of distraction if you try and approach both markets. And I think that's...
I'm conscious we throw about phrases in this industry, and many of our listeners won't understand what them phrases are. So I'll just cover off dynamic pricing, and then if you could cover off class-based yield management that you described there, just so our listeners have an understanding. So the easiest way to describe dynamic pricing, listeners, is you've all bought hotels, you've all been on booking.com or one of the OTAs and bought hotels, and you can see the price changing from 5 minutes to 10 minutes to days. It's based on supply and demand using clever technology that changes the price on a constant basis. As the operator who's supplying the product, if it's done well, you can make more money using dynamic pricing. Right, so that is dynamic pricing. Alex, could you explain?
So class-based yield management is a slightly different approach, but it ends up with the same outcome, which is you're trying to maximize profitability. So you might have two products, one for sale at $50 and one for sale at $70, and they both use the same bus or they both use the same tour guide. What you do, let's say in the last 48 hours, is you take the product that's for sale at $50 off sale, which you can do by just adjusting availability. And now the consumer who's interested in that product has to book the $70 product, not the $50 product. So just by adjusting availability, you can maximize profitability. And the reason why that's interesting is because the price itself is not changing. So if you've put the price on a leaflet and you've put the price on an online travel agent website, you're not having to, in the last 48 hours, have these prices going up and down. So you're not having to get consumers scrambling around to find a phone to go, oh golly, is it $50 now or $55? That's not what you want. What you want is a price that's on a leaflet, and that price to be consistent and carried all the way through to the point of booking. And so by using class-based yield management rather than dynamic pricing, you can keep the prices on leaflets, but you still maximize profitability. All you need to do in terms of doing that today is adjust availability, not adjust price. So every single online travel agent checks availability prior to making a booking with you if you're a small tour operator. So you can just change availability of two comparable products at just slightly different prices, and you can do that today. So we don't need all of this new dynamic pricing functionality that's been built across the industry. We can do it using availability rather than price.
Yep, that makes sense. Just on some of the points you raised there was a discussion entrepreneur Facebook group recently from Alex, leading it from Travel Curious. And this is all about the demand from the customer for last minute bookings, last minute cancellation, which has been driven by retail, which in our world is OTAs wanting to serve their customer the best they can with total last minute booking, last minute cancellation. Alex's point was he's in the world of private guiding rather than group guiding. It's all private, therefore he's finding it impossible to provide to the OTAs the level of service that they're increasingly demanding. Technology-wise, it's not an issue, as you know. You can set your reservation technology to whatever you want to feed to the retailers, or certainly any of the good reservation systems that can be had. So it's not a technology issue. Why I'm bringing it up, it seems to be there's a a bit like tours, activities, and attractions. We seem to have a retail end that is treating everything the same in order to commoditize it in a way that the consumer can purchase or cancel the same as they can purchase or cancel a hotel room today. Whereas we have big sectors of tours and activities that physically, operationally, in the background, cannot operate to these standards. Otherwise, they're losing money left, right, and centre.
This is again a classic difference between attractions and local tours. Local tours are going to need cutoffs, and attractions, because they tend not to be, well, pre-COVID, now they've got time slots. That's a slightly different discussion. But let's say we go back to not having time slots for attractions, then you can have no cutoff at all, because you can just turn up and you can buy your ticket at the door. In fact, with some attractions, you have negative cutoff, because you can get onto a ferry, the ferry can leave the dock, and then you buy your ticket. So you could actually be buying your ticket 10 minutes after the thing has started. So in attractions, you can have negative cutoffs. Now in tours, to give a bit of a sort of a historical arc on this, I can remember doing presentations around 2010, 2012, and the big thing that we were pushing at the time was being able to book the night before. So you'd be sat in your hotel room at 10 p.m., 11 p.m. going, what shall we do tomorrow? And you should be able to book it then. Then in sort of 2013, 2014, the conversation shifted on a little bit. And it was, you're having people sat at the breakfast table and they're thinking about what can they do today. And you want them to be able to book at the breakfast table, with a 4 or 5 hour cutoff. The cutoffs have evolved as far as they're going to go, and except when we start talking about digital tour operating, which is what I'm focused on now, because all of a sudden we can operate product with no cutoff. So that is where it gets slightly interesting, because if you are a food tour company and you have to have a 2, 3, 4 hour cutoff, a digital tour operator competing in the same location actually can still be on demand. So that is the natural endpoint for tour operators where cutoffs are going to go to.
So this comes back to my point that we seem to be building technology to serve all sectors of tours, activities, attractions. But as we constantly find, we have verticals within particularly tours and activities that are not suitable to the retail end, that the tech is trying to serve. The res tech in the middle is trying to serve the operator, and obviously serves the retail end. But we have these big sectors within tours and activities due to operational constraints that just cannot really be changed, that are not going to do what the retail end wants them. Therefore, the question is, should we be building different technology to serve different segments within the tours and activity space?
Yeah, I think it's slightly sad for consumers, because if you look at what can you do in 2 days' time, you've got this massive range of things that you can do. And then if you look on the day, on most online travel agent websites, the only things that you can do and book at the last minute are attractions.
Right.
And I think from a consumer experience perspective, that's sad for the consumer, because they want to be able to have the full range of product available. So there are solutions. As I said, having a little bit of digital tour operating in can help bridge the gap, so that the tour guide still gets a 2 or 3 hour cutoff, but you sandwich in a little bit of digital tour operating ahead. So from the consumer's perspective, they're starting immediately, even if the tour guide has got a little bit more time to get themselves in place. But yeah, I think booking cutoffs is going to be a battlefield over the next few years, as tour operators come up with strategies for how they can get themselves to be still available to be booked on the day.
Yeah, you did mention it there. I'm just going to emphasize it. When I look at this, if I was still operating, how would I deal with it? And I know in the business I was operating, I had cut-offs that I could not, no matter how I wheeled and dealt with the operational side of it, unless I was prepared to financially have a bunch of guys sitting doing nothing just to deal with last minute, up to minute bookings, and I'd done the numbers to work out if that was profitable. Apart from that, going forward, the way I would dealt with it was I'd have a range of experiences that were human-led, that would have operational standards and cut-off times around it, but I would have in my world, self-guided experiences, digital experiences that made sure I was getting a chunk of those last-minute transactions. Because even if I wasn't making a lot of cash from it, I was making some cash versus no cash. And the other thing I was generating is a warm lead, a hot lead, because they may not be doing the live experience, but they're doing a digital experience around the brand that I want them to do it. And then I've got details that I then can upsell, cross-sell, especially if you're in the tourism sector where people may be in destination for a week or 3 days, or if you're in the entertainment, you're in the local sector. If that person is living in your area, you've suddenly got a red hot lead if they've had a decent self-guided or digital experience, and then you can go back to them and get a booking for a live experience going forward. That to me is the way that operators are going to have to deal with this pressure, rather than constantly trying to backfill into their core operations and adopt them to the demand of the retail. It's actually creating new experiences around it, rather than trying to get their old experiences to fit the retail model.
And I think that absolutely. I mean, the product has to evolve, and I think that's a super important point. And this is going to be something that everyone's going to have to think about. What can ResTech do to help this? There's not much that ResTech can do apart from sort of the digital tour operating, which they're not positioned to offer. So I think it will be sort of an interesting evolution as the sort of the sector gets its head around it. I mean, from a consumer perspective, this is very much the same as going to the cinema, where you might have to buy a ticket 12 hours in advance, or you can buy a ticket if you risk it. You can turn up and buy a ticket on the door. Versus YouTube, where you just tap a button and you can press play and you can get something on demand. Which is more gratifying? Well, probably the thing that you pre-booked, and because maybe we can talk about the quality of the content, etc. But that's a slightly different argument. But the consumers are now just used to things being on demand, and therefore, as an industry, you have to serve that need.
I do think we're in a bit of a blip at the moment. I'm just making sure operators do understand it is a blip. We have consumers at the moment booking in advance because of the chaos of the pandemic, and there is an awareness in the market that you can't get a restaurant table, you can't get things last minute at the moment, because the industry globally is so short of staff. And I've experienced it myself in the last few weeks when traveling, and hotels operating 4 days a week, restaurants, and only serving people who are staying in the hotel, not walk-ins off the street. So there's a whole host of that means pre-booking is happening quite well at the moment, which is great for operators. But I do think operators need to understand this is a blip, and trend-wise and demographic-wise, it is just a thing. We all live on mobile phones. Last-minute booking is a thing that is not going to go away. It's just going to increase and increase and increase. And operators are going to have to design experiences that capture some of that market.
I think where you and I come at this from a slightly different perspective is that if you're ResTech, to build anything, i.e. to design something and then write the code and then test it before you sort of scale it up, that's 24 months minimum. So ResTech always has to take a slightly wider market view. So because you might have an idea today and you start building it, and if it's not going to be in the market until 24 months time, you have to be thinking over wider timelines. So all of the planning that I'm doing with my current business is all around 5-10 year timelines, because that's how long it takes you to build the technology to be right at the moment that it needs to be right. But a tour operator who's local and small can go, oh, I tell you what, we're going to introduce this new tour. That might only take 2 to 3 months. So tour operators can be much more agile than ResTech can be, actually.
So moving on, one of the industry's favorite words, distribution. Obviously, ResTech is core to distribution. sector's got slightly more complicated because channel managers have come along. Everyone is driving, obviously, because of the last-minute booking and booking online, etc., etc. The demand on operators to hook up for live availability distribution through either their ResTech, which is the majority, and then for a minority through channel managers. What's your view on distribution going forward?
I think the ResTech have been captured by the online travel agents. The online travel agents have all of the things that they need in order to make a transaction. They have the supply contract, they have the consumers, and the only thing they needed was dates, prices, and availability. So the ResTech have been distributing dates, prices, and availability to online travel agents. But everyone else, like hoteliers, airlines, they don't have supply contracts. They don't have customer service teams. They don't have money handling teams. And that whole market has sort of been missed because the ResTech have become far too focused on online travel agents who only need a subset of sort of the data that ResTechs have got. So I think there's some quite interesting opportunities still there to improve distribution. But I would say that most of these hoteliers and airlines really don't care for doing customer service and money handling. They just want to be kind of like a super affiliate. So they just want to be referring traffic and getting good service for their customers. And I don't think that the ResTechs can do that because someone has got to do the customer service and someone's got to do the money handling. And if you're a hotel who doesn't want to do it and you're a ResTech who doesn't want to do it, then where's that going to happen? So my sort of view on that is that instead of distributing transactions, we should architect the industry around distributing customer profiles and personalization to enable personalization. So, for example, if I know that someone is a vegetarian, then we shouldn't be suggesting to them that they go on a food tour that is dominated by steak, for example. It's just simple things like that, which sounds simple, but there's no way of doing that today because the online travel agents are guarding their profiles. For example, I mean, even some of them are no longer sending the email address of the customer down to the tour operator. So there's far too much profile protection going on. Yes, I know there's requirements in some places like GDPR, but reality is that you can get around that, and it's the online travel agents not wanting to share their customer profile data rather than any legal issue. So I think that we can build a distribution platform that's around profiles and about personalization. And so, for example, a hotel might know that a guest is vegetarian, in which case we should only be suggesting to that hotel guest the non-meat, non-fish food tours. That seems like a pretty straightforward example, but it's just something that can't be done today with today's infrastructure.
If we take the data, the online retailers and anybody that's retailing at the front end to the consumer, they don't actually have that much data of the consumer apart from maybe phone number, email address, maybe age because of certain activities they're booking. They had to put in the age, but it's pretty limited data, really. And then we have the issue that, and it's the industry issue, is irregular purchase. So if you're a retailer, the guest isn't really using you every 2 months, every 3 months. If you're lucky, if they're a tourist, you might get 2 bookings that week, and then you may not get another booking for 2-3 years. And hence, the cost of acquisition and the lifetime value of a customer in this industry is really, really challenging. So the point I'm getting to there is the industry at the moment doesn't really have a lot of data. When we talk about personalization, which I'm a big fan of, and how to serve the customer, we don't have the data sitting anywhere in the industry that can actually deliver much more than what we're doing at the moment. You brought up hotels. Do hotels have that data? They have probably more, but certainly on the loyalty schemes, if we go to the big hotels, so the Marriotts and the Hiltons and those of the world, in their loyalty schemes that measure hundreds of millions, they have a lot more data in there. But if you sign up to their emails, you're still getting nonsense thrown at you that is not personalised in any way, shape, or form. So, as much as I'm a fan of personalisation, my sort of question is it a pipe dream, or are we actually got any tools that are going to allow us to actually personalise?
I mean, I've built that. So on my sort of vision as to how the industry can be structured, I've built a working model of how that can happen. So I don't think it's a pipe dream because I can demonstrate that today, right? What's difficult is how you get ResTech from where they are today to that state. That's the jump. You have to move the tour operator, the ResTech, and the online travel agent to that state. So I'm not quite sure that is a simple transition, especially if you're not too motivated to do it. So we've built it, and we'll be scaling up a different industry model, which has this approach at its core, the personalization approach, and that for the people that it matters to, it matters a lot. So if you're traveling with kids, or you're vegetarian, or you don't drink alcohol, these are all things that have massive implications as to what you're going to do in a destination. So those people may I mean, I've got a sort of stats that says 22% of our customer base have got something on their profile that would mean that they would make different choices about what they're going to do in destination than people who don't have those sort of preferences. And I think that is those 22% are probably just about large enough as a bridgehead to get excited about wanting to give over more of their personal data to get a better service. And the sort of the 80% who all eat meat and all drink alcohol and all can walk 10 miles on a walking tour, they won't really care about showing their preferences because they'll just take whatever they're given because they're able to do that. But to the people who can't, I think that they will be the ones who will transition first.
Yeah, and for the audience, for the tourpreneurs to understand why this is important, super important, in my opinion. Again, it comes back to the mantra that I keep ranting on about, making operators more profitable. If we look at the retail end at the moment, online booking, just ask whoever's providing you the service, just ask them the conversion rates. The conversion rates are tiny. It's 1, 2. If anybody's getting 3%, they're outstanding. So most are operating online in the 1.5%, 2% lane, often much worse than that. So what does that mean? That means like lots of people who are visiting your information and your knowledge and your stories are not converting. So this personalization, contextualized around the customer, what does it do? It increases conversion rates. And if you increase conversion rates, even by a single percent, never mind 2, 3, 4, 5%, you're suddenly an incredibly much more profitable operator without having spent any more on marketing and acquiring the customer. You're just converting the customers better because what you're offered is contextualized correctly to that right subset of consumers. Now, that to me is why this is so interesting, because we're looking to move the needle 1%, 0.5%, 2%. These sound tiny numbers, but in profitability terms, they're huge numbers.
And personalization, now we're sort of on that topic, is not just about discovery, but it's also about operating. So the ability to be able to start a tour at someone's hotel rather than forcing the guest to come to a visitor center by 10 a.m., that the ability to personalize the delivery, the operating, is probably even more significant than the ability just to be able to personalize the discovery phase of, how does the guest work out what is the best thing for them to do. And I think as digital gets stronger on the operation side, because at the moment, we've got an industry which is digital on the retail side, but the operating is still human. So as we transition towards digital operating, we can personalize so the customer, if they're Japanese, gets their entire food tour in Japanese. If their guest is staying at this hotel, the tour starts at that hotel. This is all this is all quite obvious, but also very, very hard to execute.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult, but the upside of it is huge because, like I said, we can increase conversions. We're not looking necessarily to grow the market. It's the market is already there that can convert better, because the evidence at the moment says it's not converting well, particularly on online booking, which everybody's pushing towards. But the conversions of them online booking are not impressive at the moment.
Yeah, and I think, that's where we're talking about the future of ResTech. That's where, ResTech is very much on the retail side. You get ResTech also working on the sort of the ticket redemption, the ability to be able to wave a phone or a printed out piece of paper with a QR code or similar on it. That's pretty much where the ResTech ends. It doesn't go into the experience delivery itself. And here's a big question for you. And I'll ask you a question. You've been asking me all these questions. So what is the number one question that tour guides get asked?
Number one question, obviously depends on what sector they're in. Often, from my background, on arrival, where is the toilet?
Right. That's a good question. That's it. So can you, out of these 250 ResTechs that there are, how many of them have got a toilet project? Any of them? No. Right. So that's the point, is that there are all these consumer needs that are not being served by the ResTech.
Yeah.
Why is that?
That is where we're getting into personalization of humans. And that is contextually, once you get deep in that, you do improve conversions. You do, because you're taking care of all human needs.
Yeah, that's the point I'm trying to say, is that ResTech stop at the point that the consumer hands over their ticket. But there's all this other digital serving that we could do to the consumer, while they're on their tour, and it's things like, I'm not sure I want to interrupt the tour guide. Should I go to the loo now? Or can I go to the loo in 10 minutes time? Where are we going to be in 10 minutes time? It's simple things like that, but it's not even being addressed by any of the ResTech. The ResTech the ResTech is named ResTech because it's all about the reservation, but they need to move to being a wider scope and a wider, apply technology to the whole experience itself.
So do you see, we're coming up to wrapping up soon, but do you see the ability of the current clutch of reservation technology? Obviously, we've got the big boys, well-funded, the ones who've been going for years, so we're very well established, lots and lots of startups, or again, 2-3 year startups. Do you see them breaking out where we get some ones going vertical, so they become the best rafting operator, ResTech, or the best multi-day walking tour operator, best food tour ResTech? Do you see that happening? Is that a viable market for some of them to break out and just become the expert reservation technology in a vertical?
I think so. But that if you're the tour operator and you're going into that ResTech, you then are buying into the fact that the technology is not going to be your competitive advantage. So if you're a food tour operator and there are 3 or 4 food tour operators in your city, and all of you are on the same ResTech, well, technology, you're not going to be coming last with technology because you've got the same technology, but you also know that you're not going to get any advantage from your technology. There is simple technology out there and there's complicated technology out there, and the complicated technology is there because it's more powerful, and if it's more powerful, it enables you to do things that your competitors can't. So that, I do think there will be specialization of ResTech, but if you're a tour operator and you're going into those specialized services, and you might think this is a good thing, and it probably is a good thing if you're not technical, is that you should take that technology and go, right, we're going to have to compete on everything but technology. So we have to make our tours amazing. We have to make our guides trained totally well. And technology will just be sort of something that purrs along and just works. Great, you can do that. But if you're in a very competitive city, you need to have slightly more power, because you need to have the capability to do things that your competitors can't. For example, the ResTech might provide an API so that you or a developer can write some code to interact with your customer profiles and start doing clever things. Great. And you might have this amazing idea that you don't even want to tell the ResTech company about, because you're going to use that to drive an advantage versus your near competitors who are in the same city. So the ResTech needs to give you the power and not to be able to see exactly what you've done. And that is what the power of an API for developers, that's what it enables people to do. So I think we can have specialization, but also I think if you're trying to compete on technology, then what you really need is something with a powerful API rather than something that's specialized around your particular product type.
So if you were still CEO ResTech and you're looking at the industry today, you're looking at tour operators today, just to finish off, what's the one or two things that you think you would be doing to make tour operators more profitable?
I think I would be looking at fintech, financial technology, because I don't think money needs to flow all around the world as it does today. So, for example, why would a consumer who, let's say, might be standing in London, they might bring up an online travel agent app from a global online travel agent, the money will now flow physically, well, it won't physically flow, but it will go from London to wherever the online travel agent is headquartered, back to the supplier that's probably only 5 miles away. There's just a lot of money flows that don't need to happen. So if I was a ResTech, I would be looking at that. And I know quite a lot of the ResTech have got things on the financial side, but we just don't need money flowing around quite as much as we do. That's super important. The second thing, I think that's probably the first. But the second thing is, I don't know whether or not there really is the much market in going down the long tail of all of these small tour operators. However, what there is the opportunity to make a small tour operator a larger tour operator. So I don't think you should be trying to onboard endless small tour operators that would be 1-2 person operations. But you could take a 5-person operation and make them a 50-person operation. That will probably make more money for you than constantly be trying to sort of onboard the really smaller tour guides. Of course, tour guides who are standalone tour guides have got dedicated tour guide platforms, so that's a slightly different thing. But yeah, I think there's a massive opportunity in commercially helping the 5-employee companies become 50-employee companies. That's where I'd be looking.
Yeah, I agree in the same point there, but again, they have the data from their customer base, which is us, the tour operators. There is a lot more I see that ResTech could be working deeper with the base that is going to basically give them a customer for life rather than having to suffer churn. If that customer gets bigger, obviously they make more money. That's probably a much more attractive model to me, anyway, if I was owning a ResTech, than acquiring another 15,000 small 1-person or 2-person operations around the world. So I just want to finish up here by saying to the community that ResTech's been about now for a while, 15, 16 years. In my opinion, I think we're incredibly lucky as tour operators that we have such a wide choice of reservation technology. We also have a lot of high quality reservation technology. For the younger members and for people who have not started up recently, you may think this stuff's expensive. Trust me, it is not expensive. We've got really good technology in the industry here that is at a really cheap price. Unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember when we had to pay real money for technology versus today, where you can pay monthly or you don't pay at all and the customer pays. And this technology we're getting for a low value price is fantastic. It really is. So it's up to all of us to work deeper with the technology companies that are supporting us to allow them to help us become better operators and more profitable. Okay, Alex, thanks very much for your input today. That was great. That's Alex Bainbridge of Otora talking about the future of reservation technology, even though he doesn't run one anymore. Thank you.
Thank you.